They didn't build towns and cities at the top of hills because they liked the view. Living down by the water's edge is obviously a lot easier, but the problem with rivers, they tend to bring unwanted visitors. It was said that if you owned a house in Uzerche, you owned a castle in the Limousin, because that's how secure it was. And after it was initially sacked in the 6th century, they rebuilt the whole thing to a much higher standard, and from that point on, it became impregnable. So the price that you pay for building a home out of harm's way, you got an awful lot of steps to climb up to get there. Nobody actually managed to breach these walls and take this city, but some Saracens on their way back from another battle, they laid siege to it. I've heard of sieges before that have lasted up to a year, but this one lasted 7 years. Now, the town was very well protected with strong walls, and there were 8 gates in this town, but sadly this is the only one that remains. If you look at the front of the arch, it's pointed, but if you look at the back, that's the old Romanesque curved style, and you can see that's cracked. The Gothic arches are actually a lot more efficient at bringing the load down onto the edges than the Romanesque arches. So the back of the arch is probably the original, and then they've added this very lovely looking Gothic arch. Now, these sockets or holes that you see in the wall, they're very common. Whenever you see a stone-built arch, when they're building the walls up, they put very stout timbers across a couple of points and build some staging on top of that, and then use their centering piece, which is the bit of formwork that the carpenters make of the shape of the arch, and then the stonemasons lay their stone on top of that formwork, and when it's finished they just drop the timbers down and hopefully the arch stays where it's put. If you look down here, you can see that there are also holes in the wall for sockets, so I'm thinking the ones at the bottom would seem to suggest that they put some very heavy bolts of timber across the back of those doors, so if anybody did try and attack them, pretty much impossible to break those doors down then, even with a good battering ram. And look here, you can see the old iron hinge posts are still in the wall, and they would have lifted those gates on and off. I mean, that would have been a 10-man job, wouldn't it, with an oak gate? Saracens camped down by the river for 7 years, waiting for the citizens to come out and surrender. And eventually, after the 7 years, they fattened up the last of their 2 bulls. They opened the gates and they let these 2 bulls out to charge at the people that were down by the gates. I guess they thought that that would cause havoc and mayhem, and they would be able to sneak out in the confusion. What happened is that the Saracens saw these 2 bulls coming out, and they deduced that they were willing to let 2 bulls go, that they had so much food inside Uzerche that it was pointless them staying there any longer, trying to starve them out. So they packed up camp and went. Up at the top of the town, in the most prominent position, is the Church of Saint-Pierre, or St. Peter if you like the English. This was actually part of the monastery. It had 100 monks living up there. The church is the only part of that monastery that remains. They've got a mixture of Romanesque and Gothic arches in this church, and you can see that when they use the Gothic arch, they bring the weight of the roof and everything else down a lot sooner and a lot more directly. In other words, it's a downward thrust, so they can afford to make the columns going up a lot more slender, and that sort of adds light and air to the building and allows more light into through the tall windows. Also, having slender columns just makes the building seem a bit more ethereal. So this is the crypt. And you can just come in and switch the light on and just have a mooch about. There's nobody here to guide you, there's nobody here to take any money from you or anything else. You just have some fun. Now, a lot of people don't like crypts. They find them a bit creepy, I suppose, because that's where they used to put bodies back in the day. They may store them there before they had a funeral, or they may just have interned them there. And for me, this is very fascinating, because these columns, if you look what they've done underneath in all these arches, these columns below coincide with the columns above. So all that weight, all that roof, all those vaulted roofs, ceilings, all that stonework is coming down straight through the floor, and it's supported on these columns, which, as you can see, are arched. That's confidence, isn't it? I mean, without computers, without structural engineers, and it's worked. You know, we're talking about 800 years later and it's still here. Now, I'm not really sure what this is because it looks a little bit like a pizza oven, doesn't it? There's no chimney there. And then when you look on the front, there's a little bit of inscription on the front here, which suggests it may have even been a place where they laid the body. If you look underneath, there's a hearth, isn't there? There's definitely a hearth. They would have had a fire under there, I guess, but there's no chimney, there's no flue, unless of course this hole here is a flue, but no, I don't think so, because that would have gone straight up into the church, wouldn't it? I really don't know. Anybody got any ideas? Let me know in the comments below. Now I'm wondering now if it might have been for cremations. Here's a stone head or lintel. I guess this is an old one rather than one that they were making for somewhere. Don't forget this bit was built before the church, so they must have had a kind of drawing and an idea of where they were going to build those columns. And if you look around, there's other bits of unfinished stone masonry. I think what they did is they went outside and they worked outside on the scaffolding, and then when the weather wasn't good they came in here and chipped away at a bit of stone on day rate. Now these mediathèques are all over the place in France, and they're kind of like libraries, but they're multimedia libraries. This one is dedicated to Simone de Beauvoir, who was the partner of Jean-Paul Sartre. She used to come here for a holiday. She's a bit of a controversial character. She got involved with a few young students. She was actually banned from teaching for a while. So this is the main street. This is one of the things about these places, is there's just hardly anybody here. Look at a slate hanging on the edge of that building. That's obviously done to keep the weather out. They must have had some penetrating damp problems there. But I like to meander down through France, take a few days before I get to my destination, have a bit of a holiday with the grandchildren and so on. You know, taking in a few of these places along the way for me breaks the journey up, and you're always going to find some little gem, something unexpected. Now this is an impressive bit of work, isn't it, this doorway? Clearly the average height of a person in those days was not a lot more than 5'2", I'd say, unless you want that in metric. Now the actual door itself, maybe that's an oak door, but whatever it is, it's not half as fancy as the portico, is it? Now I reckon those lintels at the side, they're not really bits of beam there, they're just bits of cladding over what I would think are probably stills. You know, somebody's put some steel beams in there and they thought we can't leave those showing, so they've just whacked a bit of plank over the top. Now here's a fixer-upper if you fancy one. Look at all the acros propping the whole place up. And look inside, what have they got inside? Watland orb, walls. Oh yeah, there's a lot of timber used in this building. So with so much stone around here, there's not actually much in the way of timber frame buildings. I mean, you tend to get those more up in Normandy where there are thousands, but down here it's mostly stone. You build with whatever local materials you got, and they've got abundant amounts of stone and slate around this area. Reminds me in some ways of South Wales, I don't know why. And you can see that the posts that go up into the beam, the supports if you like, they're draw doweled. When they drilled the holes to put the oak dowels in, they made the holes slightly not lined up so that they were offset very slightly, so that when they drove that dowel in with a hammer, it kind of pulled on the other hole and tightened the whole thing up. And there's some lovely looking doors, and I imagine these are quite strong. I mean, once they got through the walls, they've still got to get through your front door, unless of course they come through the window. Here is where the road bends and buildings change direction. Now, given the fact that they are so good at doing curved stonework here, it's a bit strange that they've just made a sudden change in direction. They didn't have squints or anything, angled bricks or stones in those days. I suppose they could have cut them, but what they've actually done there is just butted them up. Now this is what is known as a pepper pot turret, and these are all over the place. As a plumber, my eye is drawn to these gutters. These are zinc gutters, but you can see that this one's been cut into loads of sections, and each section has been soldered together. I see these little standing stones all over the place, you know, not just in France, but just generally in old places. And I think that actually most of them are for mounting a horse, just a little step up. I'm looking at this one and thinking, is this for mounting a horse, or was this put here to protect the corner of this building from traffic? Here we arrive in Liberation Square, but it doesn't tell you what liberations. A lot to choose from. Was it when they liberated this place from the Nazis, or was it previous liberation? I mean, you can go back over 800 years. Now time marches on, and you can see that, you know, as a way of measuring time, they used to use sundials. Obviously this is the remains of a sundial. You can see the pegs gone. They've also got church bells which, you know, toll out the hour. Did they time the church bell from the sundial and ring it by hand? The town has grown now because it's more peaceful times, and a bit of commerce is built up around there. But this was always a crossing point across the Vézère, and it was an important trade route between Normandy and the Mediterranean. So a lot of people passed through here. It became a bit of a centre of power. This village was so well fortified that it became a place where people thought, well, this is where we want to store our money. But obviously the péage and all the other things, they bypassed it. It's a sleepy little place now. And this railway viaduct, all these lovely arches, this was only built in 1903, and I think it was built to take goods, stone from the quarries, maybe down to the river, maybe there's a harbour down there a little way where they used to offload the stone onto boats, take it down to what this joins the Dordogne and then takes you all the way out to Bordeaux. So, you know, good transport route for them. It was abandoned, I think, in the 60s, and it's now been turned into a very nice cycle path. Now, I fully understand the need for affordable homes. Not everybody can live in a lovely old stone cottage or a castle or anywhere else. People need affordable houses. They need them warm, draft-proof. But look at these. No imagination. There's no attempt to do anything to acknowledge the past and the architecture in this place. They've just stuck these up here. And that's one of the things about France, because I don't know what their planning permission is like, but it does seem to me that they just chuck some very ugly buildings among some very beautiful ones. And if you think back all those years ago, they were building these lovely places with no power tools, no machinery at all, just hard graft. I keep saying it, but these people, they had ambition, didn't they? A lot of skill, a hell of a lot of skill when you look at that church and all the other places. And the thing is that there are hundreds or thousands of these lovely old medieval villages or towns all across France, and a lot of people just pass them by. And the thing is that every single one of them has got a story to tell.